What's up, everybody? I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, and we are back once again, this time with some UFC DFS picks, lineup advice, and predictions for UFC Vegas 7 between Munhoz and Edgar. In this video, we're going to use the tools at OccupyFantasy.com, talk about some predictions for these fights, look at some fights to target from a DFS perspective. We'll talk about all the chaos that's happened this week with the fighters dropping out and replacement fighters coming in. And then at the very end, stick around. We'll talk about how to build your lineups for FanDuel and DraftKings, and specifically give you some FanDuel MVP options based on some knockout potential. Before we get started, though, go ahead and click that subscribe button below. That way you get access to all of our latest videos as soon as they're released here on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video. Any questions you have about the slate's a lot going on, go ahead and comment below and we'll get back to you before the slate starts tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern. Also, we are going live on Twitch at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, twitch.tv/OccupyFantasy. We'll be live. It's a live Q&A. Any questions you have, go check us out there. Reminder that Twitch subscribers do get access to our Discord channel, where we're always answering questions and discussing MMA throughout the entire week. One final thing to talk about before we get into it. We are running a free roll series for our OccupyFantasy.com members UFC contest again tonight. Last week, we gave away 10 tickets to the opening night NFL single game GPP on DraftKings. We're giving away 5 tickets tonight. Again, it's free to enter. The link to do that is in the description below. All right, so I think we should talk about this chaos first. So, looking at just this week, since the salaries have been released, before this week started, there were a couple fights that got postponed and pushed back. But starting this week, once the fights were into FanDuel and DraftKings, we had 3 fighters drop out due to a variety of issues. Then we had 2 drop out on Friday. We are recording this Saturday morning. Friday, yesterday, 2 fighters dropped out, and now their opponents are facing each other. Insanity. And then we have 5 newcomers on the scene. So 5 fighters without any true official statistics or metrics to use, which is always a good thing from a high-risk perspective, because we get a wide range of outcomes, and we get a lot of casual DFS players who don't know the names. So they're more likely to rely on betting odds, or they're more likely to rely on the names that they do know. Let's talk here about these 5 newcomers. So let's bring the Occupy model up, OccupyFantasy.com. Our real-time player dashboard that ranks every fighter on the slate, both FanDuel and DraftKings. Now, again, as we're recording this Saturday morning, FanDuel is still missing 4 players from the player pool. So some of the analysis will be cut short there. Again, continue to check back to the Occupy model, OccupyFantasy.com. That way, when they are updated, the model will be updated. And again, we'll have that information by the time the Twitch starts this afternoon. So be sure to check in there for the latest FanDuel analysis once they upload the players to the player pool. So 5 newcomers to the UFC. Let's start with this first matchup. We have Timor Valliev and Trevin Jones. Valliev was scheduled to face another fighter. Trevin Jones was waiting in Vegas, ready to go. So Trevin Jones is actually one of the top prospects out of Guam. It's a real thing. Has a decent ground game, can get some submissions, but hasn't faced the best competition. On the other hand, Valliev is a beast for sure. Comes from a great league, has fought tons of great competition. The only issue with him is he has a lot of low-volume fights, doesn't push the action. Not great for fantasy. From a real fighter perspective, he's fantastic. But from DFS, not normally someone you want to target. But the fact is, he does get a weak opponent here. And unsurprisingly, if you're in our Discord channel, you were able to get this bet in early. But I posted in there, if Valliev is anything under minus 1,000 opening money line against Trevin Jones, it'd be a disaster. And he opened at like minus 385. And me and a couple other guys in the Discord said we have to immediately pounce on this. And as we see here in the Occupy model, 175-cent move on Valliev. He's now up to minus 560. So it goes to show how poor that opening line was. And it probably should even go higher against this opponent. We have another matchup with 2 noobs fighting each other. Carlton Minus, one of the top prospects out of Alaska. Again, a real thing. And Matt Semmelsberger. Shout out to Maryland, where I'm from. He's from Maryland, making his UFC debut. And again, this is a fight we don't know much about. Semmelsberger only has 7 or 8 professional fights. Minus has a little bit more of a stand-up fighter, limited volume. Again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen here, and we should embrace that uncertainty for high-risk contests. If you look on Twitter, you read some other articles in the industry, no one's really excited about this fight. So we should see, especially for Carlton minus at his price, 8,500. He's only minus 118 on the money line. A lot of the money's moved in Semmelsberger's favor. Expect Semmelsberger to be the more popular of the two, as the lower priced, at least on DraftKings. We'll find out here on FanDuel shortly. But the lower priced fighter, he'll be more popular. As you see, we have him 27% projected ownership. Carlton minus 23%. But again, not that highly owned for either one of these guys. So maybe a spot to take advantage of because we don't actually know their true baselines or what their range of outcomes are. All right, the final fighter making his UFC debut is Mr. Jordan Wright here, the Beverly Hills Ninja. He legit fought a guy who's now 0-22. I don't know how a guy continues to fight after losing 5 fights, let alone 22. But his first few fights, the opponent's combined records were 1 win and 38 losses. So a real bevy of tough competition for Jordan Wright. He finally got an invite to Dana White's Contender Series and was immediately knocked out in like 40 seconds. So a step up in competition, obviously not ideal for Jordan Wright, but he is fighting Ike Villanueva, who's only in his second UFC fight. This should be a knockout-heavy fight, we think. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. The only other issue to discuss before we jump into the main event and some of these other fights to target is that because Daniel Rodriguez and Dwight Grant's opponents dropped out due to weight issues on Friday, they're now facing each other. And we get a pretty rare circumstance where we have a fighter who is, in Dwight Grant's situation, is plus 180, but he's priced at $8,800 on DraftKings, $17 on FanDuel. They can't change the prices after salaries are released. So despite the fact that now he's an underdog against his new opponent, he's $8,817. And as a result, he's barely going to be owned. We have him projected for less than 5% on FanDuel, less than 20% on DraftKings. And Dwight Grant's got some knockout potential. So if you're looking for a high-risk play, low-owned fighter, Dwight Grant's your guy. Because as we transition here, only 10 fights on this slate. Differentiation is going to be very, very difficult with ownership being concentrated in a couple spots. But all we have to do is cross our fingers, hope that there's some major upsets, or hope that some of these lower-owned, high-priced fighters can get a quick knockout and outscore the fighters around them. So we haven't talked about the main event yet between Munhoz and Edgar. Munhoz is coming off a COVID diagnosis, so no clue how that's going to affect him, and we're not going to even try to predict that. His last fight was postponed as a result. Frankie Edgar's moving down to bantamweight for the first time. It didn't look like he had any issues cutting weight if you looked at the weigh-ins. So don't have too much trepidation with his weight cut. And we actually have a slight money line move, unsurprisingly, on the favorite, Pedro Munhoz, much better fighter. He opened at minus 250. He's now minus 278. Pretty big favorite in the main event. As a result, we see the typical DraftKings and FanDuel pricing. DraftKings, Munhoz much higher priced. And we have Edgar, 7,200, going to be a popular. We have 40% projected ownership. Popular underdog because he is in the main event, gets the extra 2 rounds in a 5-round fight potentially. And the fact that there aren't many really good, high upside underdogs on this slate, lower priced fighters, Edgar is going to be even more popular as a result. And I imagine we see even a lot of main event fight stacks in high risk lineups. We don't advise that, but I imagine some people will look to do that even more this week with just not that many great fighters in that range. You're going to need exposure to both these guys. So maybe you go a little bit heavier on Munhoz, but probably close to 100% exposure. Should be a high volume fight regardless of who wins. Decent knockout potential, especially on Munhoz's side. We see 47% KO chance. Edgar just down at 16%, but again, if he wins, it's going to come from a decent amount of volume. And again, at 7,200, he's going to be in the optimal lineup. So that's why he ranks in the top half of the model if he wins. The other high-owned fighter that we should talk about on this slate is Maria Agapova, who I thought opened as a pretty high favorite. Betting markets didn't think it was high enough. She is now minus 1430, not a typo, on the money line. It's moved 320 cents in her favor. So she's expected to win this fight, 15 out of every 16 times? She's definitely way better than Dobson. Dobson is not good. I think Agapova has some holes in her game and not And I don't think she should be a minus 1,500 favorite against anyone, but Dobson's really bad. So unfortunately, it's not a real situation we could take advantage of. You know, if you're making 20 lineups, 150 lineups, I say at least get Dobson, match the field, maybe go double, because she's projected 6% ownership on DraftKings, 1% on FanDuel, unsurprisingly. So if you make 20 lineups, get her in 1 or 2, pray some chaos happens, because you're going to need a low-owned fighter to do something on the slate to have a chance of not tying with hundreds of people in the high-risk contest. So, again, Dobson's probably not going to win, probably going to get destroyed. But, again, we're praying for chaos here. And I don't think she wins the fight more than 10% of the time. But 10%, I mean, look at her KO percent chance. If we scroll all the way down here, 8%, that is higher than her projected ownership. So if we trust the betting markets and she knocks out or finishes Agapova 8% of the time, add in a couple other percentage points for the rare upset, and that's nearly double her field projected ownership. So while it feels gross, having her in 10% of lineups on this type of slate is probably the move. Now, if you're making one lineup, 5, 10 lineups, probably don't need to do it. All right, one fighter I want to talk about before we get into some more fights is Joe Salecki, who tops the model. He's definitely a better DraftKings play than he is on FanDuel, and it's because of the scoring system. DraftKings, we get points for advances. FanDuel, we do not. And Salecki is a beast on the ground. Once he gets on the ground, he's looking to advance position as much as he can. Look at his first UFC fight. Look at his pre-UFC fights. Very similar. A few advances per takedown. And all those factors combined have him as one of the highest upside fighters on the slate, because if he gets 4 or 5 takedowns, he can add 4 or 5 advances too. And at his price, very moderately priced on DraftKings, definitely a great play there. Now, in FanDuel, we don't get points for advances. We only get points for the takedowns. Hubbard actually may be a better play on FanDuel with takedown defense. We saw it last week with guys against Dwalish-Wheelie, against the other name slipping my mind, but the takedown-heavy opponents, and you get points for those takedowns, can really add up. So Hubbard's probably a better play there. It's all about knowing the scoring system for both these sites, and Salecki is an advance-heavy, advance-dependent play, especially on DraftKings. All right, before we finish this video, a quick reminder to join our MMA free roll series, OccupyFantasy.com. The link is in the description below. For members only, free to enter. We're giving away NFL contest tickets for the opening week. Go check it out. All right, a couple KO heavy fights where there should be relatively low volume, but knockout potential is there. The first one is Jordan Wright, Villanueva. We see Wright with a 38% chance. This line has bounced back and forth between favorite underdog, well, at least since the matchup's been dictated. 38% chance for Jordan Wright. Villanueva also 38% chance. Should be a sloppy fight. Despite the model, we actually like Villanueva a little bit more. And you'll see that in our betting article later today. But again, you should probably have heavy exposure here. 75% chance of a KO. Decent chance of it happening in round 1 if that's the case, especially at these prices. These guys are going to be optimal. So get your exposure to both of these. FanDuel, very good MVP options for both these guys. The other one is Daniel Rodriguez and Dwight Grant. Low volume, gonna need a knockout to get to the optimal lineup, especially with this weird pricing. D-Rod, 28% knockout chance. Dwight Grant just 20%. We've already talked about this weird matchup, but get these guys in. And then of course Mike Rodriguez and Marcin Prachnio, 52% knockout chance for Rodriguez. Prachnio down at 20%. Again, huge knockout potential in all 3 of these fights. We're looking for chaos, so the underdogs are probably the bets here, especially in Prachnio and Dwight Grant. Whereas the Jordan Wright and Villanueva is pretty much a toss-up. We don't get a true ownership edge either way. All right, so we've talked about how to get different on this slate. Just 10 fights. Concentrated ownership. I mean, Agapova near 60% projected ownership on both sites. Munhoz 50 to 60% depending on which site you're playing on. And then the obvious, only having 10 fights, limited possibilities with your lineups, and the fact that one of the underdogs is priced in the 8K range on DraftKings. It's $17 on FanDuel. Even less underdogs to choose from. So really gets tricky. So what we have to do is, for DraftKings, we have to leave money on the table. The only option for high-risk contests. Now, low-risk contests, we just jam in as much projected ownership as we can. You'll be good to go there. Probably even stack the main event in your low-risk contest. So 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads. On DraftKings, get both Munhoz and Edgar in your lineup because of the price difference. Now, FanDuel doesn't make much sense because they priced their main event underdogs way up. We see Edgar at $18, not nearly as great of a low-risk play on that site. But for high-risk contests, your GPPs, your leagues, your satellites, you have to leave a ton of money on the table to get unique. Get heavy exposure to the unknowns. Guys who have low ownership but don't have a ton of tape or data, because people don't have that data, they're not going to use those fighters as often. And we've seen this many times. We saw it last week in the first fight of the night. The favorite was 8,800, and he was only 19% owned because not a ton of data, had shown low volume in his regional fights. But we don't know what they're going to do when they get to the UFC stage. And as a result, he broke the slate. And so we could see the same thing here with guys like Carlton Minus, Semmelsberger, Jordan Wright. Who knows? Maybe even Trevin Jones, the underdog against Valliev. We don't know. So play for the chaos angles here. Play for the unknowns. And again, there's going to be some bad plays. Guys like Trevin Jones, guys like Dobson, guys like Pragnio, guys like Grant at their prices. Objectively bad plays. But high-risk contests, we need to think about how can bad plays win. And if they win, what does that mean for our lineups? And if they win, that means we're ahead of a ton of lineups in our high-risk contests. So it sucks to do it. You just got to hold your nose and play these underdogs and pray for some chaos. Now, FanDuel, much easier. We just don't use some of the popular fighters in our MVP spots, and our lineups don't look as gross. So Agapova going to be one of the highest owned MVPs with a 68% knockout chance. Just don't use her. Pray she doesn't get a late round one finish. Main event favorites, always popular. Munhoz going to be over 10% owned in the MVP spot. Get guys that we've talked about. Jordan Wright, Ike Villanueva, Mike Rodriguez. Just sort by KO percentage in the model. Alonzo Menafield, 40% chance. A bunch of different guys here that you can use. Again, if you use a fighter that's less than 10% projected ownership in the MVP spot, it allows you to use 3 high-owned fighters in your flex spots on FanDuel. And that just means your lineup not only has similar, if not more upside than those other lineups that use the popular MVP fighters, you also get less gross plays in your lineup. You can actually play better plays just because you get a little different in the MVP spot. So something to think about. All right, well, that'll do it for this video. Appreciate everyone listening. I know I talked a lot, but a lot to digest in this smaller slate with a lot of unknown variables. Hopefully, by the time Twitch comes out this evening, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, FanDuel will have priced these fighters, and we can discuss that more. So again, if you're playing on FanDuel, do check back into the Occupy model frequently, occupyfantasy.com. Check in with us on Twitch live at 4:30. Get your questions answered. Or if you have any questions at all, you can't make the Twitch, you can't make the replay, you only have time to build lineups this morning, hop in the comment section below. Let us know your questions, and we'll gladly answer them. And then before you get out of here, do us a favor, click the subscribe button below. That way you get access to all of our latest videos when they're released on YouTube. So, Brian Jester for OccupyFantasy.com. Appreciate y'all listening. Good luck tonight. Let's root for some chaos.